Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of KOIN Conversations, airing daily on KOIN Plus at 3 and then also 7. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Alex with POLITICO. She's a longtime reporter in D.C. circles. First, she was with The Hill for a number of years, moved over to POLITICO not too long ago. Alex, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are covering the White House right now during a time that is almost unmatched in terms of hour by hour, in some cases minute by minute, news and headlines. Just kind of explain to us, what is that madness like?
Yeah, it's been a year so far of this second administration, of Trump's second administration, and it definitely has been a whirlwind of information. It seems like there's been multiple lives within this administration. I was reflecting on the last year of we dove right into Elon Musk at the helm of the overhaul of federal government, things that really impacted things here in D.C., while also getting to know, the Trump White House, the Vance's office, all the other players around D.C. Some were in the first administration, some were in the second. So kind of dove in head first early on. A lot of executive orders from this White House right away, a lot to keep up with of what the president was focused on, what was really important to him. Of course, there's international policies as well.
Yeah.
Just kind of an example of kind of what the whirlwind can be like around here. This week, he was in Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum. And before heading there, he was saying, I'm going to raise the stakes on my desire to acquire Greenland and maybe put some tariffs on that. Then we saw his speech on Wednesday morning in Davos saying, I want Greenland, but I'm going to pull back a little bit and say that I won't use military force. That was a big change in rhetoric for him. Then he met with the NATO secretary, and then he said, I'll pull back on those tariff threats as well. And there's a framework of a deal. So that's over the span of 12 hours that we were getting these back-to-back occurrences happen, and how much, you have to pay attention of where are their shifts in rhetoric, where's their shifts in policy and stance, where is he saying something that's different than maybe his officials at the White House are saying, and just keeping up with all of that.
Yeah, as we talk here, I've got some photos I'll bring up just of you kind of in action. Walk me through a little bit. What is the experience like of being so close to some of these decisions, whether you're riding on Air Force Two or Air Force One? It has to kind of be surreal in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Trips with the president or the vice president is always surreal. I'm sure after people do this job for 30 years, it's still pretty amazing to get to do those trips. Being in the briefing room for really special moments that, whether the president is in there, the vice president, or just also Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt talking about, these really important issues that are the news of the day, and we get to be in there asking really tough questions. It's all, it does not get lost on you how special that is. I think one of the coolest experiences, I guess, that I had is around between Christmas and New Year, so late December. A few weeks ago, I was in Mar-a-Lago covering the president while he was down at his estate in Florida, and President Zelensky of Ukraine and Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel came there back to back. And so we were in the room for those meetings. We were waiting outside while they were having discussions about, peace and with Russia, discussions about the future of Gaza with Netanyahu. And we're just outside the room. And then they brought us in to ask questions. So being able to ask, two presidents questions is pretty incredible, or a prime minister and a president. And so those are moments that are just really special too, of being that close to the action, getting to ask questions, but also being in a group of reporters. There was only a dozen of us or so. So you're really one of the few people who get to ask these important questions.
Love him or hate him, the president does love the camera. He does love to engage with the media as much as he may heckle it in a way.
Yeah.
Very different than what we saw during the Biden White House, which I know you covered a little bit as well, a little bit differently, but kind of just talk about some of the differences, not from like a political perspective, obviously, but just from a reporting perspective and also access.
Yeah, access is a huge one. I mean, when I was covering the Biden years, I'd be in the pool with the White House pool with other
Sure.
reporters, and you get to maybe go into the Oval Office briefly. There'd be what's called a spray at the top of his meeting with a foreign leader, let's say, and maybe like one or two reporters can ask some questions that they yell out, and the president would respond. But then that was pretty much it. It is a whole new world to us, and we're still learning about this a year in. But that this president now, President Trump, will keep reporters in the Oval Office for an hour plus. There's questions on any topics you want to ask about.
Yeah, nothing's off limits, really.
Nothing's off limits. And just kind of feeling out what he wants to engage in. He'll engage in almost anything, but what you can get an interesting, newsy answer on, and all of us kind of working together to figure out, can we move on to domestic policy while we're, while there's a foreign leader in here and we're talking about foreign policy. So it's all, very transparent is how this White House wants to put it, but they really do bring you in and say, if there's something that you have a question on, why don't you ask the president himself? And so that's a big difference. It was interesting covering President Biden during the election before he had dropped out, because oftentimes it's only print reporters like myself who are allowed in the room when he's on the road talking to donors at some of these special events. So I am curious how that will work with President Trump, because often what he says is on camera. So it's not a question of, is it a print reporter or a TV reporter in the room? It's whoever is in the room, but also the public gets to watch this. So if it's those kinds of donor events or midterm fundraisers for Republican candidates, how much access there'll be, or if it's something that the president says, turn the cameras on, I want everyone to be able to see this stuff.
Is it your sense that the current president, President Trump, feels like the media is a tool that he can use? Is it your sense that he feels like it's an enemy? Because I know sometimes when the cameras get turned off and when the microphones are put away, you hear from people that he's talking to a lot of the reporters and trying to feel things out. So what's it like at that point?
Yeah, I think it definitely is looked at as a tool. We know this president watches a lot of television.
Sure.
He's very aware of what the media is saying about him and about his policies. So he's obviously, a consumer of the media, but I think he does use it as a tool. Of course, there's, the times that he's clashed with reporters. Those are often on camera, and maybe his base gets excited by it. Maybe other people get annoyed by it, and it causes a political kind of situation and rift there. But there are definitely times that he will, if he wants to get a message across, he calls in the media and says, I'll open the Oval Office to this. I want to talk about this bill in front of the cameras. That happens last minute a lot, that the press aides to him will say, all right, he wants you in. Let's go ahead into the Oval Office. There's also some behind the scenes moments, like you mentioned, that isn't caught on camera, obviously, mostly because it's like a mad rush when something like this happens. But when I was down in Mar-a-Lago in December, there was the day that Netanyahu was there, and there was family members of one of the last Israeli hostages in Gaza, who's presumed to be deceased. But the president came out, and there was no cameras on. It was just a group of us, and he's, you kind of heard his voice, which was like striking because it was like random. We all looked up, and he said, "I want to introduce you to this family. They're here while I'm having these talks with the Prime Minister of Israel. This is, important to me because of X, Y, and Z." And so he does have those kind of behind the scenes moments with reporters too. And that's something that he wanted us to report on, that he wanted us to, include in our notes, that this family was present for all this. And so, he was smart to go right to us and do it himself.
As a reporter in D.C., and as you've been on the trail a little bit with the president, do you get a sense Is there a heightened danger level now? Something that maybe you didn't feel when you were covering Biden? I know 15, 20 years ago, a lot of reporters who have been at it for a long time will say, well, it certainly feels a lot different than it did 20 years ago. I've wondered if you've noticed anything just in the past few years, though.
That's interesting. I think there's definitely a sense of there's, a lot of anger or,
Yeah.
things are so polarized. And so when you see it, when you're in the motorcade driving by a group of people, there's anything from signs saying, we love you, to the middle finger and people yelling. And, especially a lot of these back during the Biden years when there'd be protesters that would interrupt some of the speeches,
Sure.
Anti-Israel protesters, those were kind of like, it's just jarring when you're in the room and you're that close to the president and there's really angry people near him about an issue. I think the one day that became like very acutely aware of safety, though, was I was with former President Biden in Rehoboth, which is the town he goes to in Delaware when he's on vacation. The day that now President Trump had the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. And so we were waiting for President Biden while he was in mass. He was going to church, and we all saw on the news there was an assassination attempt. We're all on Twitter, like looking at the videos. And then you're right next to, he comes out of church and you're right next to the current president. While this, really scary thing is happening elsewhere in the country, and things were just so heightened and tense. I think those moments like that, and then of course you're thinking of your colleagues on the ground in Butler too. So moments like that do put in perspective kind of, that there are some danger to jobs like this. And thankfully reporters were all safe that day, but it can be, kind of a frightening feeling.
Obviously, you're covering the White House, so you're covering the president, you're covering the immediate characters and people within his inner circle. But from time to time, I'm sure you've also listened to, the vice president there, obviously cabinet secretaries. What's your sense of how the administration, a year in now, because we are more than a year in, has kind of developed? Does it really seem like it's a team? Does it seem like there are fractures or little fiefdoms almost? You hear about that in a lot of White Houses. I'm just curious how you think overall the approach has been.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. I mean, you have such big personalities,
right,
like a Vice President Vance and a Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And those are two people that people consider the future of the Republican Party. Rubio has ran before. Vance obviously has political aspirations beyond being vice president. And so there was so much focus on these two. Do they get along? Then there was the Elon Musk of it all. Like, do they get along with him because he's around Trump all the time? So there were a lot of, I think there were definitely moments. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has, there were moments that he didn't get along with Elon Musk. Now that era has kind of ended.
Faded.
I think has faded away. I think the relationship with Vance and Rubio, what the White House says, that they work really well together, that there's no like, who's the future of the party tension going on, I do think is right from my reporting too, is that they do work as a team really well. And so we've seen them produce some things together. I think the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, of it all is really fascinating to watch. She's such a powerful figure in Washington. And from my reporting, if she has an issue with somebody or doesn't think that person is helpful to the president, she has a lot of say on issues like that. The president really does trust her. And then there's also, I think, a point of tension or a push and pull that I've been kind of looking at a theme throughout multiple stories is, there's more traditional Republicans or people who align maybe more with traditional Republicans. And then there's more populist thinking Republicans inside this White House. And so when you talk about an issue like healthcare and like, do we let the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire or not? And what does that mean for the midterms? And what does that mean for our base? There's, people in the White House that think one way about that issue And there's some people who are more political minded who think, let's look ahead on that issue and how it could impact us and fellow Republicans. So those are some interesting points just when it comes down to actual, policies of there's definitely areas there where one group inside the White House thinks one way and another thinks another way.
For all of his references about maybe a third term or the little wisecracks or the jokes that the president makes, I think the conventional thinking is it will be Vance or Rubio, who's probably the 28 Republican nominee. Certainly a lot of time and a lot could unfold between now and then. But is it your feeling from being in the White House that really it will be one of those two who's the Republican nominee?
It is my feeling as the nominee. I think something that I think is interesting to watch is where do they go for vice president? I mean, right. Rubio's role right now is being Secretary of State is almost just as intense and huge of a
he's almost the co-vice president for everything outside of the country.
So do you go to being a vice president from being Secretary of State? I mean, Hillary Clinton didn't want to do that. Right. She wanted to be president. So, who will then be the second? And there's also a lot of Republicans, though, who are waiting in the wings. If it is a Vice President Vance, if Vice President Vance can be the nominee, would they look at a former Virginia governor, Glenn Youngkin, or someone in the Senate right now as a possibility for vice president, maybe even keep Rubio on as Secretary of State? I mean, these are all shifting parts that there's still 3 years to go to build these relationships to see what happens there. But yes, in terms of the nominee, I mean, or the top contender, I should say, it's up to voters who the nominee is. But unless there's a huge rift with Vance, right now, things don't look like they're going that way. Things are pretty friendly. I do think, he'd be who Trump would deem be his, the person to take over the party.
Once the president is not the president, how do you see his influence on the Republican Party, on national politics, on the dialogue? Is he still going to have a big seat at the table? I mean, he's going to be firing off Truth Social posts, but will as many people care?
Yeah, I think that's something that will be determined over the next 3 years. I mean, we're already seeing there's situations where, the MAGA base, like a Steve Bannon type, disagreeing with the president on certain issues.
There's been a big split, not necessarily with Bannon, but just in the Epstein saga.
Epstein stuff. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, I don't align with Trump anymore. I'm more America first, and he's not America first enough. This isn't what I voted for. So I think if voices like that continue to have influence in that kind of sect of the Republican Party, then that would diminish some of the president's influence post-presidency. It also is interesting just how extreme post-presidencies can be. You can have a Biden who you rarely hear from. He does a speech here and there, obviously left in a tough position even in his own party because of his decision to run, and that didn't turn out well for Democrats, and to wait to drop out. Then you have an Obama who has such influence. He still can talk and people will listen. And so, is that where, a former president, Trump, could be, especially if it is Vance, Rubio, whoever else who has such a close relationship with Trump? I think he would still, have that influence too, just because of those background relationships.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to watch over the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, final question. Anything that's not what you expected or maybe frustrating about the White House speech, aside from the obvious of getting, not getting the callback or what have you, but is there anything that's a lot different than you thought it would be?
Honestly, a big kind of surprise to us, and I know I mentioned this, so I feel like this is like cheating already, but the amount of time the president spends with the press. I mean, I actually thought early in the administration that he would spend more work weeks down in Florida. He loves being in Mar-a-Lago. No, he's here in DC 4 to 5 days a week.
Right.
He's bringing in the press, 2 times a week or more, talking for a really long time. How many actual sit-down interviews? We haven't talked about that. I mean, he spoke with the New York Times the other day. He has spoken with my colleague at Politico. How many print outlets he's willing to speak to? It's not just he's going on Fox News, he's also going on an array of different outlets. So
That's true.
That's surprising to me too, of how much access there is to different types of newspapers, different types of television. And, that he's willing, it seems like at this point, willing to talk to really anybody who can get that access. It's very difficult to land an interview with him, but a lot of good reporters have been able to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Alex, I can't thank you enough for the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Cool. Hope that was good.